Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty darn good. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm a little bit tired. We had a big
sleepy.
end of the year party last night. No, my daughters did. They had people stay the night. Kept me up all night. You know.
You're not young, Jen. You can't be doing that all-nighter stuff
and I
anymore.
didn't get to use my sleep cream. My sleep cream helps me sleep like a baby, but I couldn't because I had the 18-year-old babies downstairs.
Stay alert.
Being loud.
That's right.
I only got 3 hours sleep, but that's okay, right?
That's so cute. Yep. Here, got a little case for us today?
I do. Are you ready for it?
I am ready. Let's go.
All right. In April of 2001, Greg Heimann paced the floor of the SeaTac Airport in Washington State for 3.5 hours, waiting for his father Jerry to pick him up. Greg hadn't visited his father in person for more than 5 years because he lived in Arkansas, and it was either a 33-hour drive to see his father or it was a 6-hour-long flight. So because of this, their visits were few and far between. But this visit was important and had been planned for weeks in advance. Greg's father, Jerry, had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and it had spread enough that it was deemed terminal. This could be the last time Greg and his wife would ever see his father. Jerry took care of his 89-year-old mother who had Alzheimer's, and Evelyn's Alzheimer's had advanced enough that she could no longer communicate, walk, or do simple tasks like wheeling herself to another part of the house in her wheelchair. Jerry had refused all cancer treatments to prolong his life because he wanted to spend what time he had left clear-minded and unhindered by the side effects of chemotherapy so he could take care of his mother. He didn't want her to go into a nursing home, and if the treatments made him too sick to care for her, that's exactly what would happen. However, Greg, as much as he thought the decision was noble and showed the boundless generosity of his father, he was going to try to talk his father into getting those chemo treatments anyway. I mean, Jerry was only 64 years old, and Greg felt that the treatments could buy him several more years if he'd only take them. When Jerry didn't show up to retrieve Greg and his wife from SeaTac as planned, they got a shuttle and went to his father's house. It was possible that Jerry just forgot that he was supposed to get them, or maybe there had been some emergency with Grandma Evelyn. Jerry did like to visit bars for company, and he liked to occasionally have drinks, but he would never be described as irresponsible. It had to be a good explanation as to why Jerry wasn't at the airport as he promised. When they got to the house, it looked ransacked, and most of the furniture was missing. However, when they made their way into the dining room, Greg and his wife found 89-year-old Evelyn slumped in her wheelchair, eating newspapers and magazines. Evelyn had been sitting in soiled diapers for days, and she'd had nothing to eat or drink. All she could reach were the newspapers and magazines left on the table. Greg was overcome.
Did you say she was eating them?
Yeah.
Because eating and reading?
She was eating them. She was starving.
Okay.
I mean, nobody really knows how much Alzheimer patients can understand or comprehend, but she was hungry.
Yeah.
And she had to eat something. Yeah. It was filling her belly.
Yeah. That's sad. Okay.
Greg searched the house but couldn't find Jerry, and he knew that there was no way his father would voluntarily leave his grandmother to fend for herself. It was at this point that Greg called 911. Not only did it appear that Evelyn had been left alone for days, but there was blood spatter on the chandelier and trash can. And what's worse, the blood spatter was all over his grandmother's wheelchair, and it didn't seem to belong to her. When the police arrived, Evelyn was taken to the hospital, and the police asked the neighbors if they had seen Jerry in the past few days, and nobody had. The neighbors reported that they hadn't seen anybody at the residence after the live-in housekeeper and elder helper, Barbara Opel, had backed a U-Haul into Jerry's driveway, packed it full of things from Jerry's house, and left.
Wait,
That's suspicious,
really?
right? A little suspicious.
Ooh.
Police immediately began searching for a U-Haul, and they didn't have to look very far, because as luck would have it, a U-Haul, driven by Barbara Opel, had just been pulled over in a traffic violation. Greg and his wife immediately thought, who is this Barbara Opel? Well, I'm going to tell you.
Divine intervention's what I say about that pullover thing there.
Thank you. Born in May of 1963, Barbara Marie Opel was the product of an affair. Her mother, an alcoholic, had originally abandoned Barbara at the hospital when she was born, and Barbara was put into the foster care system. However, after 2 months, her mother decided she wanted her daughter back, and since Barbara had not been adopted yet, she was returned to her mother. Her mother kept the identity of Barbara's biological father a secret for years, and even though Barbara was raised in a toxic environment, she was also spoiled by her parents. Her parents fought, they drank, and her mother often took Barbara into bars at the age of 14 and encouraged her daughter to get together with men way older than her.
Ugh.
As if this environment weren't bad enough, Barbara was also the victim of fetal alcohol syndrome, and as a result, she developed at a slower rate. She had very few friends growing up, and even as an adult, she didn't have any real friends. Barbara never seemed to have any type of meaningful relationships outside of her family, and all those relationships were toxic. She married a man named Bill Opel, and the marriage was abusive and often resulted in explosive fights. Still, they felt that they should have children together. And so Heather was born in 1987, and then Derek was born in 1989. The toddlers were often locked outside of their house or left alone for hours. Barbara was known as a nightmare mother. She was shrill, always angry, and constantly screaming. She even slapped her children when they were as young as 3 months old.
Oh, never good. But baby, infant, even worse, that young.
Bill said that Barbara had never really held down a job, and from most accounts, it seemed as though she just wanted something from nothing. Their neighbors called DFS on the family numerous times, but each time Child Protective Services went to the Opel home, they saw that the house was clean, and the children were clean and well fed, so they felt the situation was not abusive. There were no marks or bruises on the children at the time of the visits either. And each time they were called, CPS found, quote, no evidence of abuse. Even though they were called numerous times by several different witnesses for various reasons, nothing was ever done. No counseling or intervention was ever given to Barbara Opel. When calling DFS or CPS did no good, neighbors called the police with the same result. The police saw no evidence of abuse. The house was clean, and so there was nothing that could be done. But as one witness would say, quote, not all abuse is visible to outsiders. Barbara and Bill divorced after 7 years of marriage, and things only got worse. According to one psychologist, the divorce was, quote, an active battleground. Barbara never adhered to the custody agreement set down by the courts and kept the children from Bill for years. She also remarried and divorced again, and that marriage resulted in another child, Tiffany, who was born in 1994. The dissolution of that marriage was just as contentious, and Barbara ended up with child support as her main source of income. This was the beginning of an itinerant lifestyle she forced upon her children. And according to welfare authorities, the Opel family had lived in 22 places in 7 years.
Wow.
And at one point, they lived in their car. I mean, that's an average of like 3 moves a year. That's a lot for little kids. Or for anybody, really.
Anybody, yeah.
Barbara and her children had been evicted from 10 apartments for non-payment of rent and would often skip out in the middle of the night to avoid being served papers. The kids were moved from one school to another and often missing days of school as well. If the Seattle newspaper were correct that welfare authorities were aware of the instability of their living conditions, there was nothing ever done about it. I mean, clearly the children were without a home, personal items, or proper care, and even on occasion, they suffered from malnutrition. I mean, seriously, how? What does it take for somebody to get help?
Well, if somebody calls once, okay, but if they're, if it's a repeated call, obviously something's going on.
Right. A name to get evicted from that many houses, it's just...
Something's going on.
But even with all that instability and abuse, Heather Opel did well in school and excelled in sports. Barbara enmeshed herself in every minute detail of her children's lives. Heather was such a good athlete that she was on one of the boys' sports teams, and Barbara would show up at the games and she'd scream and she'd yell and she'd berate Heather from the sidelines. And of course, Heather would break down and start crying in the middle of the game.
Oh, see, I thought you meant to cheer her on. So I was like, oh, that's cute. No, that's what.
She was one of those parents. You know what I'm talking about. One boy that Heather went to school with said that Barbara would come onto the school grounds and belittle the other students and try to start fights between them. What? She's a grown-ass adult. I know. Some people close to the situation said that it was as if Barbara Opel had never become an adult. She lived vicariously through her children, and she would hang out with them and act like them and party with them, all in an attempt to experience the things that she didn't experience with her own teen years. And honestly, I mean, if she went through any kind of trauma as a kid, that kind of stops your development to full emotional maturity, right? I think I looked it up and it's called arrested psychological development, where it says trauma can freeze your emotional response at the age you experienced it. So that could be it too. Or she could just be...
Not a nice person?
Exactly. The accounts of Barbara Opel's personality and abuse were not limited to the few neighbors. Across the board, people remembered when Barbara moved into or left their neighborhood. She was described as, and these are all quotes, mean, screaming at her kids all the time, foul-mouthed, and never spoke lovingly to her children. Even one of her closest family members described her as, quote, brain dead.
Oh.
Barbara was all those things, but she was about to prove how selfish and cruel she really was. At some point in the second half of the year 2000, Barbara Opel struck up a conversation with Jerry Heimann. Jerry, born in 1937 and originally from North Dakota, had recently retired from Boeing and took care of his ailing mother, Evelyn. Jerry had 4 children, including Greg and one son who had been killed in a motorcycle accident in 1982. Jerry also had 6 grandchildren, and when he spoke with Barbara Opel, he couldn't help to feel sorry for her. She was the same age as his own children. Barbara's 3 children, Heather, Derek, and Tiffany, were the same generation as his own grandchildren. So Jerry explained to Barbara that he had recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he needed somebody to help take care of his mother, Evelyn. Advanced Alzheimer's is a terrible illness requiring 24-hour care. And Jerry, knowing his cancer was only going to get worse, desperately wanted to keep his mother out of a nursing home. So he offered Barbara a job as a caregiver for his mother, and he also offered Barbara and her children his home. I mean, that would be a good idea, he thought. Jerry needed help and would need more help as the cancer progressed. Barbara and her family were homeless and needed a place to stay, and so this was the perfect solution. Barbara agreed and moved her and her family into Jerry's home. The following months were probably the most stable months the Opel children experienced. Barbara and the kids lived in the basement while Evelyn Heimann stayed on the main floor and Jerry lived on the second floor. Obviously, all communal parts of the house, like the kitchen and living room, were all shared by everyone, but everybody had private areas to retreat to. Sounds like the perfect situation, right? And things were great in the beginning. Heather excelled at school and she made lots of friends. And Jerry would often help Heather with her homework. The kids called Evelyn Grandma, and even though Jerry had thrown the Opel family a lifeline, he was just as grateful for the help Barbara gave him where his mother was concerned. Christmas rolled around and Jerry bought Christmas presents for the whole family. In addition, he gave Barbara $300 so that she could go buy the kids some presents. However, as time went on, Barbara took on more responsibilities like buying groceries and picking up prescriptions. So this meant that Barbara had access to Jerry's finances and financial records.
Yeah, not good.
Nope. People do fun things for money, don't they?
They really...
Barbara soon learned that Jerry had just over $40,000 in the bank. And it didn't matter to her that Jerry worked his entire life, 40 hours a week, every week of his adult life, to save that money. It didn't matter to her that he would need that $40,000 to live on and support his mother for however many years he had left on this planet. It didn't matter to her that it wasn't her money and that Jerry owed her nothing. She just wanted it.
People are so cruel.
At first, Barbara started to buy things for herself with Jerry's money or credit card. At one point, she even wrote herself a check for $1,800. Now, nobody's quite sure if Barbara just thought that because Jerry had the $40,000 that he wouldn't miss almost $2,000 from his checking account, or if she was just testing the waters to see his reaction. When Jerry saw that the money was missing, he confronted Barbara about it, and he was quite rightfully angry. But for whatever reason, Jerry didn't fire her or kick her out of his house. I mean, many people would have immediately
see ya.
Extricated themselves from Barbara and her family, but many who knew Jerry believed he couldn't bring himself to turn the children out on the street. So Barbara and her children continued to live there. For her part, Barbara was enraged that Jerry would want to keep his own hard-earned money and that his generosity hadn't been generous enough.
The nerve of him wanting to keep his own money.
I know. So she immediately became fixated on getting that $40,000 for herself. And it's funny because $40,000 is a lot of money, but you know what I'm saying?
It's not really.
In the scheme of things, it's not. It's not a lot of money, but I guess if you don't have anything, $40,000 is the world, right?
Yeah, but people like her would steal no matter what anyway, so
she tried a few different things. She tried poisoning Jerry with weed killer by sprinkling it on his pizza. But instead of killing Jerry, it just made him horribly sick for a few days. She tried hiring different people to murder him, but they were all smart and turned her down. And the would-be assassins had enough sense to say no, but didn't have enough sense to report the fact that they had been solicited for murder to the police. She then enlisted the help of some of Heather's middle school friends.
No.
The young kids grabbed knives and baseball bats and entered Jerry's room while he was sleeping, but they chickened out. They didn't tell the police either.
What? Not even kids have the biggest mouth ever.
I know.
They didn't. No.
Barbara often told acquaintances that she wished Jerry was dead. And considering that he had terminal cancer, she would get her wish, but it wasn't soon enough for her. And besides, if she waited around for him to die of natural causes, if there was any money left in his account by then, his family were to be the ones that would get the money, not her. Barbara helped her children host a Valentine's Day party in February and invited several of Heather's school friends. Boys and girls alike attended the party, with Heather allowing the kids to smoke marijuana, drink alcohol, use the backyard hot tub, and most disturbingly, allow whichever kids wanted to have sex the use of her bedroom to do so. And where was her mother, Barbara? Barbara was right in the middle of it all that night. She was drinking and smoking weed.
I'm utterly speechless. I mean, of course.
Whenever you want to think yourself a bad mom, let's think of Barbara Opel. Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
After the middle school-aged boys went home, several of the girls stayed overnight. One of the girls was Miriam Oliver. She was 13. She lived with her grandmother and came from a dysfunctional family. Barbara approached Miriam and simply asked her to kill Jerry. And at first, Miriam said no. But then Barbara pressured the girl, asking, "Well, what kind of friend are you?" When it appeared that most people just immediately told Barbara no when she asked them to kill Jerry, she knew she had to up the stakes. She needed to not only offer them something in return, but she needed to give them a good reason to commit murder. So Barbara threw in, "Hey, Jerry's abusing Heather. What kind of friend wouldn't stop a man from abusing her best friend?" She added, "I'll buy you a pair of roller skates."
Oh, the roller skates are what's going to seal the deal.
Mm-hmm. The offer seemed to carry more weight this time, and Miriam agreed. While Jerry was sitting at the kitchen table, Miriam, a small 13-year-old girl, walked up behind Jerry and hit him over the head with a baseball bat.
Oh my gosh.
But because Miriam was such a waif of a little girl, the one strike didn't do much damage except enrage Jerry. Shortly thereafter, Jerry told some friends of his that Barbara was trying to kill him. But still, he didn't make her move out.
What?
He must have really felt bad for those kids. That's all I could think of.
I'd keep the kids and kick her out then. Jerry, she's going to be successful sooner or later.
I know. You'd think. And to that point, there was no contract binding Barbara to work for Jerry for a certain period of time, and they weren't married. So if Jerry was abusive to her or her children, all she had to do was leave. Right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Why wouldn't she leave with her children? If Jerry really was abusing her children, why wouldn't she leave?
Well, because we know why.
Right.
Because it's a lie.
Or at least contact the police report, right?
Yeah, but
and
we
report it. We all know it is a lie, you know?
Yes, yeah.
Even if it was, and it's not, it was a full-faced lie. If she left, she wouldn't have gotten her hands on the money.
Mm-hmm. That was just an excuse.
That's her main focal point right now.
Mm-hmm.
By now, you all know how much I love my Spa Styler Blow Dry and Scalp Massage Hair Dryer by Yaman USA. There's so many reasons why I think it's amazing. I mean, it's lightweight and quiet. Boy, is it quiet. And it dries my hair in half the time by using less heat, which is amazing. And it has the red light infrared technology that helps promote hair growth. Oh, and don't forget the scalp massager diffuser attachment. It makes me feel like I'm at some fancy spa. And you know, since I've been using this revolutionary hair dryer, I've noticed that my hair is a lot smoother, and it doesn't frizz anymore after a blow dry. My husband, he even commented that my hair looks shinier and healthier, and he doesn't notice anything. So as much as I love the hair dryer, I was thinking I need to look to see what other products Yaman USA have. And I saw that they have the Spa Styler Straight Plus Wave. It's a hair straightener that also uses the red light infrared technology. Now, this technology helps retain your hair's natural moisture while using less heat. And I'm interested in this product because of the rounded plates and the curved barrel. Now, I think it's going to make it easier to add curls and waves to my hair. And you know what? The summer is the perfect time to wear beach waves. And I'm going to use our code TCP for 20% off discount and treat myself to the Spa Styler Straight Plus Wave. I think I deserve it. And I think you do too. So if you want to experience the future of beauty, you can visit yamanusa.com and use code TCP for a 20% discount. That's code TCP at yamanusa.com to get your 20% discount. All the while, Barbara was claiming that Jerry abused her daughter, which he wasn't. Barbara engaged in the real abuse of her daughter. She decided that she needed a teenager older than Heather and Miriam to carry out the deed. Somebody bigger, a little more mature but not too bright. And he needed to be gullible. Enter Jeffrey Grote. One night, when Barbara was at the skating rink with her kids and Miriam, she saw a tall, lumbering 17-year-old working as a bouncer. His name was Jeff. Barbara encouraged Heather to flirt with him and to proposition him.
Oh.
Now, Heather was a child. Not only was she tiny, I mean, she weighed about 90 pounds, but she hadn't even started menstruating yet. I mean, she was a child by all definitions, right? She was in middle school. And Jeff was in high school. But Heather, who was an extremely devoted and dutiful child, did exactly as her mother instructed. Barbara invited Jeff back to Jerry's house that night, which Jeff did. Barbara told him that he and Heather could go into Heather's room alone and have sex, which Jeff did. Barbara stood outside the door and listened to make sure it happened.
I don't even know what to say. I know. That evil just crossed over to like beyond evil.
I know.
Ooh.
After 1 week, Heather told Jeff that he was more than welcome to move in with them to the basement of Jerry's home. And Jeff did. The owner of the Marysville Skate Inn had known Jeff for years because that's where he'd been skating since he was a kid, and he, along with Jeff's co-workers, noticed a change in his behavior.
Mm-hmm.
One night, Barbara, her daughter Heather, and Miriam Oliver visited the skating rink to see Jeff while he was at work, and they caused this huge scene, swearing and harassing the staff and customers, and the owner kicked them out. But now that Barbara had hooked Jeff into her family, she fed Jeff the line, "Jerry's abusing Heather." She explained that she needed Jerry to die and that she needed Jeff to help them do it. Now, to his credit, Jeff initially said no. Barbara also gave him the guilt trip about how he wasn't a very good boyfriend if he didn't protect Heather. So now he's on the fence. Barbara sweetened the deal by promising to buy Jeff a car.
Oh, wow.
And he finally agreed.
Her promising all this stuff, that $40 is not going to last too long.
$40,000, I know. Mm-hmm.
I mean, $40,000, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Barbara didn't just get Jeff to have sex with her daughter so that he'd feel obligated to help. She did it because then she would have something to hold over him.
Mm-hmm.
The age of consent in Washington is 16, and Heather was way younger than 16. Even the state's Romeo and Juliet clause wouldn't protect Jeff if the age difference was too great. I'm not really for sure if Washington has the Romeo and Juliet clause. One source that I looked at said they did, another said it didn't. And basically, it's like if the kids were like a couple years, like if one was 17 and she was 15, it depends on the state, but that would be okay, right? In the state's eyes. They couldn't get him for statutory rape. Since he was 17 and she was 13.
A baby.
Yes. It's a big deal. It was in Barbara's best interest to get Jeff to have sex with her daughter as soon as she could. Quite simply, it was just more leverage. Barbara then told him that he needed to enlist others to help because they needed enough people to get the job done. Barbara enlisted the help of her own daughter Heather and her friend Miriam, and Jeff found 14-year-old Kyle Boston and his 13-year-old cousin.
I guess because they're young and naive and
she's demanding
to do this.
It seemed that everyone would be joining in the killing except for Barbara herself and her two younger kids.
Of course.
So on the night of April 13th, 2001, the 5 teenagers ambushed Jerry Heimann as he returned to the house from an errand. One of them hit Jerry over the head with an aluminum baseball bat, and Jerry crumpled to the floor. Then 3 of the others began hitting Jerry with baseball bats. One of the bats was the aluminum bat, and the other 2 were smaller souvenir-type bats from a Seattle Mariners game. Miriam and Heather took turns stabbing Jerry while he begged for mercy. Things didn't go as planned, though. 14-year-old Kyle and his 13-year-old cousin, and when I say he's 13, I read that he had just turned 13 2 weeks before all this happened.
So he's
yes,
young, very young.
Right.
Wow.
So the 2 boys, Kyle and the cousin, freaked out when blood started spurting, and they ran from the house.
Good.
Barbara and the 2 younger kids, Derek and Tiffany, stood downstairs yelling words of encouragement up at the ceiling. But Jerry was still breathing. Miriam lost her nerve halfway through the onslaught and ran downstairs, trying to find her way out of the house. That left Jeff and Heather upstairs alone with the now weakened and dying Jerry. Barbara, however, was not about to let Miriam leave. "Get up there and do what you're supposed to do," she said. "You're supposed to be Heather's friend. You're supposed to be there for her." And so Miriam dutifully went back upstairs. At this point, Jeff had sliced Jerry's throat, but he was still alive. So Miriam picked up the bat, slammed it down hard on Jerry's head, and said, "Well, he's dead now." Heather, however, exclaimed, "That was fun. I want to do it again." All of this, all the beating and running and stabbing and screaming was done right in front of Jerry's mother, who had no choice but to watch in silence.
Oh.
It's horrible, isn't it?
the evil that is in this world, I swear to goodness.
The mother. When the murderous teenagers were finished, Barbara came upstairs with her 7-year-old and her 11-year-old and instructed them to help clean up the murder scene. When they finished cleaning up the blood, they dumped Jerry's body about 10 miles from his home. Then Barbara, Heather, Jeff, Miriam, Derek, Tiffany, and even Kyle and his cousin all went out to Denny's for a celebratory dinner.
Again,
Kyle,
she's blowing through that money.
I know. Well, listen to this. Kyle was paid $220. His cousin was paid $100. Jeff received a car. Miriam, her skates, and Heather got a dirt bike out of the whole ordeal. And Jerry's credit card paid for the dinner. The next day, worried that if Jerry's body were found, that he would be identified, Barbara and the kids went back to the dump site and poured acid on Jerry's face. That poor Jerry, he did nothing.
You're wrong.
But be kind, and this is what he gets. This was also the day that Barbara rented a U-Haul, which she packed with Jerry's belongings, using Jerry's checkbook. Then she simply shut and locked the door and left a blood-spattered Evelyn alone in her wheelchair to die of thirst and starvation.
I'm surprised she didn't kill her, too. Really.
I don't know why. Maybe deemed it unnecessary? I don't know. And now the police were knocking on the hotel room door of Barbara Opel, asking her to come down to the station and answer some questions. They also took all the children in and put them in separate rooms. Barbara spun a story of how Jerry was dying and he just was finished with this world. He'd given her all his earthly possessions and she had no idea where he was. She had no answer as to why Jerry chose to leave everything to her instead of his own family. I mean, nobody was talking to the police. Heather and Jeff did not betray Barbara.
I'm surprised, just because kids are usually so easy to break. Especially after witnessing that, or participating in that, rather.
But 11-year-old Derek did.
Good.
When the police asked him if he knew where Jerry was, he simply said, yeah, he's dead. And then he led them to Jerry's body, which had been wrapped in sheets and left rotting on the Tulalip Indian Reservation for 8 days. Police arrested Barbara Opel, Heather Opel, Jeff Grote, Kyle Boston, and his cousin. Kyle's cousin, who was never identified, was the only one to be tried as a juvenile. He was sentenced to 7 years in juvenile detention and released. The judge felt that the hands-on nature of the attack made the other teens perfect candidates for adult court. Jeff Grote pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 50 years. Heather Opel also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 22 years. But Heather found a silver lining in her 22-year sentence. This is how young she was. She thought that when she was released, she was still going to be young enough to play professional basketball.
Oh, girl.
Sad. Miriam Oliver and Kyle Boston also received sentences similar to Heather's. However, when Barbara came before the court, she pleaded not guilty.
Because she didn't do it.
She immediately threw her kids under the bus.
Shocked, I tell you. Shocked.
She claimed that she was fed up with how Jerry Heimann treated her daughter, and that, as a way to blow off steam, she would just make comments like, oh, I wish he were dead. But she didn't really mean it, Cam. She didn't mean it.
No, she didn't mean it at all. She did not mean to go out and solicit all those people to murder him.
No, not at all.
With bribing them of skates and motorcycles and cars.
Yeah. Barbara stated that she asked the teenagers to beat up Jerry to teach him a lesson, but never intended for him to die. When prosecutors inquired why Barbara was in possession of Jerry's credit cards, Barbara responded, well, I had no way to pay for my kids, no way to get food.
Well, yeah, and Jerry probably would want her to have it, along with that $40,000 he worked his whole life for.
She would have had all that if Jerry was alive, too. Barbara claimed to have been horrified by the crime and said that if she had known Grote and his friends were going to murder Jerry, she would have kicked him out of the house. However, once the crime was done, she wanted to protect Heather. Luckily, the jury didn't buy it, and they found her guilty of orchestrating the whole thing. The death penalty was on the table, but the jury decided not to sentence her to death, and instead, Barbara received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. She was also ordered to never have contact with any of her children again. In Heather's diary, entered into evidence at her and Barbara's trial, Heather stated, quote, "We will have $41,000 just to mess around with. I hope I get what I want. I want a new bike. So my mom said if I help kill Jerry, I can get one." Barbara Opel used her children at every turn. The whole reason she never went upstairs during the murder was because she didn't want to be held accountable for Jerry's death. Knowing that the kids were minors, she gambled with the fact that they would get lighter sentences than her. Barbara was willing to throw away at least 1/4 of their lives on this planet for her own selfish gain. The defense for the teenagers relied heavily on all of them being from broken homes and neglectful or abusive situations. One clinical psychologist for the defense characterized Heather as a, quote, "abnormally obedient child, someone who was incapable of standing up to a controlling mother." Psychologists have tried to understand why abused children will defend their abusive parents and stay with their abusive parents and continue to love them. The term trauma bond, also known as Stockholm Syndrome, describes a deep bond that forms between a victim and their abusers. Victims of abuse often develop a strong sense of loyalty towards their abuser, despite the fact that the bond is damaging to them. And when it comes to children, it's even more complicated. I mean, in layman's terms, a biochemical switch is developed during the bonding time between a mother and her newborn child. And when the child is in danger or away from the mother, a switch is flipped. And when they return to their mother, the switch flips the other way and the child feels safe. Quote, "When the parent is the source of pain or danger or fear, the circuit and the amygdala still works," which explains why an abused child will often still protect and love their abusers. There's also the fact that many abused children are isolated or lived in sequestered life. Not only is this a conscious effort by the parent to make sure that the child doesn't have the opportunity to tell on them, but because of their own isolation, many abused children don't even know that they're being abused. They have nothing to compare their experiences to. They just know that they have very strong reactions to certain situations. It often takes years before they fully understand that how they were treated was just wrong. Also, if the child never understands that they were abused, how will they know not to treat their own children, spouses, or friends in the same manner? But prosecuting attorneys thought that Heather's diary entry and her exclamation about how much fun the murder was showed that her part in the murder had little to do with Stockholm Syndrome. Barbara Opel was abused, neglected, and used as a child and was a victim of fetal alcohol syndrome. She passed that cycle of abuse on to her children. Heather committed murder quite gleefully, and unfortunately, Barbara's son Derek, the one that he told the police what happened to Jerry, he went on to molest toddlers when he was just 13 years old.
Oh, not where I thought you were going with that.
Understanding the root causes of certain behaviors doesn't condone that behavior, but it helps highlight the need for counseling and therapy in homes and relationships where the abuse is rampant. No matter how many things contributed to Barbara Opel's despicable behavior, she still knew that certain things were criminal. Murdering somebody, leaving an incapacitated woman to die, and stealing Jerry's money and belongings, not just from him, but from his family, are all crimes, and she knew it.
If she
knew they were wrong, yeah. And if she didn't know they were wrong, she wouldn't have tried to hide the fact that she did them.
Mm-hmm. And she kept trying again and again.
Again and again, and she was relentless. I mean, Barbara destroyed so many lives, and being a single parent of 3 is extremely hard, but people do it all the time.
All the time.
And they don't murder a generous, loving person for a short-term fix.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if by chance there is truth to Barbara's claims that Jerry was abusive, she could have left Jerry's house with her kids at any time and reported it to the authorities. That's not shaming her, is it?
No.
Okay, because
I don't think so.
Domestic violence, if you're in a DV situation.
But they're not related. She's a killer, so no.
She is, okay. All right. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that, quote, children are constitutionally different from adults for purposes of sentencing. And soon after, the state of Washington reevaluated the harsh sentences given to minors. And as a result, Heather Opel, Miriam Oliver, and Kyle Boston were all released from prison after serving 20 of their 22 years.
Oh.
Jeff Grote, who was given a 50-year sentence, was also released. All of the teenagers who contributed to the death of Jerry are now free, much to the grief of Jerry's family. Barbara, however, is still behind bars and will be until the day she dies.
Yeah, that's the one I'd be more worried about.
Mm-hmm. This case is still hotly debated over whether or not the teenagers received the appropriate sentences for the crime. But one thing that's not debated is that Jerry Heimann didn't have to help Barbara or her children at all. He helped Heather do her homework, he bought them all Christmas presents, and he gave them a home. He was repaid with a brutal and painful death. Jerry saw the face of Heather Opel as she stabbed him. His last thoughts had to be one of sheer terror, confusion, and ultimately betrayal. And I also wanted to note that Jerry's mother at the time, when they found her, she was taken to the hospital where she recovered and she lived 2 more years. And she did pass away in a nursing home, unfortunately, what Jerry didn't want. But she passed away at 2003, 2 years later.
I just hate to say that. I hate that people like her live in this world. And
Barbara?
those, yeah. Yes. And those kids, I don't know. I kind of agree with their sentence. Now, the 17-year-old manipulators manipulate. That's
exactly
what she did. So
and Heather wanted to please her mother.
Yeah.
You know that.
Well, or scared of her. If I don't comply, I'm going to be the one in trouble.
Yeah, I think Heather was 34 when she was released, and they said that she had been rehabilitated in prison. I mean, she had dozens of certificates that she received while incarcerated, and I wrote this down here, including those for team building, decision-making, and academic courses. And a psychologist last year found Heather to be a low risk to commit another violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
And Miriam, real quick, just to tell you, she received early release in 2021. So they're just recently released. They have been out only a couple years. But in 2014, she became a founding member of Freedom Education Project of Puget Sound, which is a nonprofit that provides access to college education for incarcerated women in Washington state and creates pathways to higher education after release from prison. And she joined the Washington Innocent Project in 2022 as the program and operations assistant. I mean, she's doing great, I think. She's to be commended.
Well, and those kids could have, and you know what? Maybe that was a blessing that they ended up going to prison, because otherwise they would have been with her longer. Right. And then,
But Jerry shouldn't have had to die.
Absolutely not.
That's the problem. I mean, too bad Child Protective Services couldn't, or the police couldn't have stepped in and gotten the children away from Barbara. Not all abuse is seen, right? I mean, Barbara was manipulating them to do her deed. And her kids wanted to please her. She was a screeching mother.
Mm-hmm. As children, you do look to the adult to know best.
Right.
So they probably thought, well, this is going to be good. This is what mom wants us to do, And
at 13 or 14, I get a bike to a child that has never really had a steady home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's something. A pair of roller skates, that's means a lot to kids at that age.
And she knew that. She
right.
knew, she's despicable.
So she had them do her evil bidding to kill somebody. Come on.
And the guy was nice as can be. They would have been better off just to take care, not to steal from him, but to live there and be, they would have been much better served to live in that house under a roof, food, and a caring person helping look out for them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, 6 months to a year. Right.
He probably would have left them some stuff too.
Exactly. Or Jerry's kids might have helped them out. For all the kindness you showed my father, here's this. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe not, but I probably would. Yeah. But that's just me. But I'm sure they're sweet. Yeah. Horrible story. Or it's not a story. It really happened.
Crime.
Yeah. Horrible crime.
One thing that...
so many victims. Again
and again on this podcast, you think that, you think it just can't get worse, and then it does.
People get lower and lower.
They sure do. Unreal.
I agree.
Something else, man. I tell you.
Poor Jerry. And I feel bad for the kids. I do. That's another thing. I mean, these killers, even though they were young, they're off scot-free for a brutal attack on their father, who was nothing but kind to them. Like I said, many victims, it spiderwebs itself out.
Sure does, doesn't it? And who was in charge? One person.
Yep.
Well, good job, Jen.
Thanks.
What are you watching, Jen?
I'm in the 3rd episode of Palm Royale, and I really like it, except the CGI on everybody is kind of disruptive, especially Ricky Martin, who is he's easy on the eyes.
He is easy on the eyes.
The wrinkleless filter, like making everybody wrinkle-free.
He's like a Snapchat filter all the time.
It is, and it's really disruptive. I mean, you can tell. I texted you, remember? And I'm like, he either has the world's greatest plastic surgeon or it's CGI. Yep. I mean, because it was like, he's a good-looking man. I'm not going to lie.
I have to go in now and see. I'm going to have to tune into that.
He looks like a Ken doll. And I really like it. It's really good. Kristen Wiig is amazing in it. Carol Burnett is in there. My favorite, Allison Janney, is there.
What channel is it on?
It's Apple TV.
Apple TV. Don't think I have Apple. I go back and forth getting things and then getting rid of them,
I like Apple. It's got good quality programming. Kind of like the old HBO. Remember how good HBO would be with like The Sopranos?
Oh, yeah.
Sex and the City, like all those really good classic shows. Now Apple TV's kind of taken over that.
Apple TV's the new HBO.
It is. I think so. What about you?
Well, I'm watching The Jinx Part 2. The 3rd episode drops tonight, which I will not be awake for, and then I'll catch it tomorrow. Under the Bridge. I think you said you watched that.
I watched. It's really good.
It is good.
It?
I caught up. A little shocker there, and I was like, I was all ready for that next episode, and nope, not till May 7th.
I know. That's how I was too.
Dang it!
I was so upset because I use that as my walking, my thing to walk, and I was like, okay, let's do the 3rd, and there was no 3rd episode, and then to top that off, there was no Will Trent, no new Will Trent because the 2nd season of that's out too.
Oh yeah. I did watch yesterday, and I think I mentioned this to you, and it's something interesting. I think there's only one season. I really liked it. It's called The Accused. It's on Hulu, and it's a drama, 1-hour drama, and it starts off, this is right up our listeners' alley, I would think. It starts off that somebody's committed a crime, and you see him in the courtroom, but you don't know why. And then they kind of go backwards from there. It had some very interesting things to think about.
Are these fictionalized? Or?
Yeah, they're fiction, but they could be true. Let me tell you, but they are
based on true story.
And there is usually some sort of guest star in each one, so you'll know somebody. Rhea Perlman's in one. The kid from the Cosby Show, Malcolm Jamal Warner, is that his name? Him?
Yep.
Theo. There you go. But there were some interesting things. All right. So, for instance, I posed this to Jen, and it was just something interesting to think about. And it is, if you had a child, which both of us do, and you knew, I don't want to give too much away.
If you knew your child would go to commit mass murder.
Yes.
What would you do to stop him?
Yes. There you go. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
How far would you go to stop him?
Usually in the series, you don't really know what the twist is to the end, right?
Okay. So it's kind of a twisty-turvy. Okay.
So, for instance, with this one, I thought the father had killed somebody, and that wasn't it. So then you get to the end and you find out what it is, right?
Okay.
But it was so good, and I'm so sad. I love it. I mean, I was totally just really, and every episode, well, there was one I didn't care for too much, but whatever. But all of them were really, really good.
There's usually one that is always disappointed. But I mean, if you get 7 good ones out of 8.
Yeah.
Good. I'll add that to my...
Yeah. And just ponder some things like if your child was sexually assaulted and you had the opportunity to come upon this person in a dog.
Probably.
You see what I'm saying? It was just that kind of... So it's just interesting.
I would gladly give the remaining 30 years of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. So just stuff like that. And
I wouldn't say gladly, but
it's really well acted. It's really good. It's really good.
Good. I will put that on my list. I know I keep saying this. I'm just so proud of myself. I've been watching.
I'm so proud of you too.
An hour Monday through Friday since November, the beginning.
So good. That's good.
And if I don't watch a show, all I do is hate myself.
Obsess. Well, you probably obsess over the time, right?
Yeah,
You're like,
right. So I need good shows to keep my mind elsewhere. Otherwise, I'm like dreading the whole thing. And I usually have Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays covered, but I need Mondays and Tuesdays to do things.
Well,
so
I'm
going to add The Accused.
Jinx, because do Jinx. You'll have 3 episodes, and you can watch that on Monday nights.
Yeah, there's something about the Robert Durst thing. I don't know.
It's interesting. I think
it is interesting, but I can see myself not getting lost in it. I need to get lost in something.
It's pretty good.
At the beginning of the episode, I said how tired I was because I stayed up all night, right? Before I came into my recording studio, which is my husband's office and Hot Wheel room, I put my tablet that I have the script in and my phone in the basket of laundry and came downstairs to put the load in. And
No, you did not.
Dumped the basket in the laundry and put in the detergent and everything.
With your phone and tablet in there?
And I'm like, where's my tablet and phone? And I'm like,
no, you did not.
Oh my God. And I said a bunch of really bad words.
Oh, shucks.
And I had to.
Darned it.
Oh, biscuit eater. Yeah, I dumped them. Yeah, I had to.
They didn't get wet, did they?
No. Okay. Thank God.
Boy, you
wasn't
are lucky.
that quickly. Oh, I know. But I just dumped the whole thing in.
Oh,
and I'm like, oh, Jennifer.
You got to put it right on the top so that you see it.
Well, I did. It was right on the top, but I was just
not
tired and thinking of coming down here, thinking about what was going on. Yeah, and I just dumped them all in the. Yeah.
You are
I would
lucky.
not have been happy if I would have lost my tablet and
your phone and
my phone. Yeah, one fell swoop.
Woo!
Yep.
Yeah.
Good times.
Not good. Good
times. All right. So that's it. That's all I have.
All right. I will see you next week. But until then, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertese from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.